Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be across the nation or around the world. Once again, you're listening to the VMware Communities Roundtable podcast. This is podcast number 662. My name is Eric Nielsen, and with me today, I have my regular co-host, Matt Lungeth. Today is Wednesday, September 27th, 2023. Matt, how you doing?
Eric, I am well. I am back from the Boston UserCon last week, and I have to say I heard some good feedback. Often I kind of misnomer this, and occasionally we do have listeners to both this podcast and video vlog that are out there. And the episodes of late have really resonated with the customers and partners and even VMware employees that are out there to hear some of these stories that were reminiscing. And I was sorry I wasn't able to participate in last week's call, but I have to say I think that the conversation between yourself and John Furrier was one of our best of recent memory. And to that end, we have an episode about the history of hands-on labs, and we'll get into all of that in just a minute. But before we touch on all of those points, sir, my favorite questions. How are you? How are things out on the West Coast? And what is the color of the bay? I do hear things are a little smoky out in the valley.
We did have a little smoke the last week and a half, but nothing orange, nothing. Just a little light blue haze happening from one fire that's up north. But it hasn't been bad, not like the years where everything was orange and socked in. So it's not comparable. And if you didn't know better, you probably wouldn't even notice that we had a little bit of blue haze. It reminds me of the pollution before we got electric cars, right? Like now, California air is really clear and crystal now, and you don't see any more haze in the valley, but a little bit of fire action going on. But it is nice weather. We've had 72 degrees, chillier at night now. Almost want to turn on the heater when it gets into like 62 degrees in the house. It's a little chilly,
downright frigid out there in Northern California at 62.
Yeah, exactly. Class of the end of September weather. Excited about Halloween season coming up, and enjoying California and the color of the bay. We were out there the other day, and it's a nice solid green with a little light chop because we had a little weather come through. We had a little rain come through, so we're coming into the winter land for California, as we say. Little light drizzle and 62 degrees. If we have to put on our winter parkas and stuff to bundle up for that. But happy times here. Looking forward to all the activity that's happening with VMware Explore Europe. That's looking really well. We're funding everything. Everything's agreeing. The community VMTN booth with V Brownbang will be there, and the community sessions are filling up, and the code sessions are full. And some vendors are going to be there. Some VMware people are going to be doing some interesting code sessions. So that's all happening, and really well. We've got the code labs funded, code lab sessions with ChatGPT and ChatGPT programming, and I've asked those guys to add the hackathon plugin that allows you to ask for PowerShell scripts to control virtualization using PowerShell with using ChatGPT. So we'll extend that lab a little bit better than the one in Vegas where we didn't have that plugin. So thanks to the hackathon for bringing that to our attention. The hackathon is also funded. It's going to be an external event in a really cool space, back down into the city. And so we're debating on whether we're going to have buses for you guys or just get everybody over there because it's by the hotel area. But the hackathon space is cool. Like we did, I think in 2018, where we, lease a space, everybody comes together and it feels like an event. It's just not in a session room. So looking forward to that as well. The expert party, we're going to get something going there. I haven't talked to Corey yet, but looks like everything's funded. Everybody's getting excited. I got my tickets. Some of my people got their tickets now. So everything's green and looking forward to, seeing everybody and being in Europe for Explore in Barcelona. So that's where we're going. Matt, I have not heard whether you're going to be able to get yourself free to go or not, but we should probably talk about that.
Time will tell. Yes, we should.
Yes, we should. This is true. We are coming into the October season where everything will be excited. I would say that I'm excited to have my tickets, which means that, coming out of the Broadcom acquisition, I will be still working at VMware doing, or I guess Broadcom doing something. Don't know what my position will be or whether I'll have a long-term position, but I should be into November because I now have tickets, and several of our teams does as well. So it's always fun to, hear that and know that, and looking forward to a very fun November, right? So with that. Anything else before we get over to HOL with Doug Beer? I like beer, a boot. Weddings, we were like drinking a lot. So Doug, welcome to the show. We've had you on many times before. Doug works on content for HOL. So why don't you tell us a little bit what your title is, what you do, and then we'll get into the history of HOL and some fun throwback topics while we then look forward as well.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. Actually, I have a long history with the hands-on labs, basically going back to 2005, where I was a customer, and I would actually go through at VMworld and collect the lab manuals because, that's what we did, is we printed lab manuals, and, that was a way to kind of take some of VMworld back with me. I contributed to the labs in 2008 and 2009 as a content creator. And then I started working for VMware in 2013 when they created a core team for the hands-on labs. And so I've been on the hands-on labs team from 2013 to the end of last year. So I actually moved on to a new role, but from a historical perspective, I can definitely talk about what's going on in the hands-on labs.
Yeah, so to get that right, you were an external employee, somebody working externally, and they recruited you to do HOL, or did you work at VMware collecting lab manuals?
So I collected lab manuals when I was a customer. In 2008 and 2009, I was a partner, and I was recruited to help with the PowerShell and Perl labs. Back in those days, we did the instructor led, so it was all, a room of 25 people, an instructor at the front. Still printed lab manuals. So
now, did you get a special badge, or did they pay for you to come to the or at least get you a free ticket when you would come work collecting lab manuals?
So I did get a free ticket when I created content and presented.
Those were fun days. Did you guys get shirts or jackets or anything like that too from that space? I know back in the day it was like kind of fun to be in that space where you were, running the labs. It was like a very cliquey team. It was the who's who of kind of like who knew how to do virtualization back then, right? In the early.
I was a total fanboy. Yeah, I got a bowling shirt, in 2008. So we before we kind of corporatized the hands-on labs, back in the early days, it was bowling shirts that the lab team would get.
Yeah, those were fun days too, because no one knew virtualization, so people were coming in and just like lines waiting to get into labs, right? And it hadn't gone into this full scale bring your own device, massive amount of people. It was interesting and fun back in those days, right? Like I remember that. When those days, I believe on-prem, everybody had to go in and set up HOLs on machines on-prem. There was no such thing as the cloud back then, right? It was just like, and I remember one year, I forget what year it was, 8, 9 or whatever, at the bottom of the escalators in Moscone, they had like a big rack environment where they set up the servers, and that's where they spent a lot of time, 2 days before, and they could only get in the venue, 2 days before Saturday or whatever. And they had to build a whole little mini data center there and get everything running. And it was back in those days dicey, if I remember, Matt, whether the stuff was even going to run right. And I think we had some days where things didn't run right, and there were lines and shutdowns for HOL for like 2 hours while they rebooted everything. Remember, did you experience any of that stress?
So I wasn't part of the infrastructure team during that year. It was 2008 or 2009. I wish I could remember. But they built that mini data center. So it was the first year we had Cisco UCS backing the labs. And it was the first year that like Project California had been kind of released as UCS. So it was kind of fresh off the assembly line equipment. So there were all kinds of extra challenges in addition to, kind of building that data center completely in Moscone at the last minute.
So Matt, did you experience as an external guy back then any of the HOL infrastructure? Were you even able to come to explore back in the early 2010s?
No, I wasn't. My first Explorer was 2017, 2018. I have been a user and had 2.5 in production, so since 2004, 2005, but was never able to attend Explorer until I had actually switched over into several different roles throughout my IT career, and then actually left the industry as a whole, as I've talked about before, where I went into more of a IT consultant for a parent company that had some interest in pipe and steel for the Marcellus shale play here in the U.S. or the United States. It's particularly the Northeast. Also some retail interested in some real estate. But then I decided to make a change. I came back in and picked up as an IT director at a local manufacturer that made automotive accessories. And the first year that I was back at that role, I was able to figure out a way through the vExpert community to attend Explore. So my interaction with hands-on labs has always been from a step back from this history. But Doug, I will say about one of that, when is the first time that you can remember where we moved from that, where we're building the full stack, right, within the show to using more, let's call it, it could either be co-load or true cloud services, where we weren't running around trying to stand up a whole entire data center instead of 2 days in a giant convention center that's controlled. I think that's the other thing behind the scenes of all of this, Eric. You and I have talked about it a couple of different times throughout, as we get closer to Explore, the constraints that maybe the general audience isn't aware of, that when you're in a place like Moscone, that the mere idea of picking something up or putting down a piece of gaff tape on the floor
before we even get to
can
that,
be interesting.
I had a one layer before that layer, right? Which is when Doug started, it was kind of like volunteer, right? And it was like customers and everybody. They didn't have a full-time HOL group, right? It was just people working in engineering and SEs and a collection of customers that were handing out lab. It was just a free group that's why it was so clicky, because it was like you got recruited into that and you had to be of a certain caliber to even be part of and it wasn't a team inside of VMware. And then at some point they actually kind of created a team that then reported into central engineering, if I remember right, or something. And there was one of the guys from Europe was a big community guy that ended up, I can't remember his name, but he took over and then ran HOL so Doug, do you remember when it started to become more formalized as a group building HOL versus when it was just a collection of people?
Sure. Well, so those two questions actually they dovetail really well. So I started on the team officially in 2013, and in 2013 we were all cloud. So everything ran out of VMware data centers running Cloud Director with on-prem data centers. So prior to that, I know in 2012 it was cloud, and I don't remember if in 2011 it was also cloud-ish, or when they kind of made the full transition from on-prem to running in the cloud.
Right. So there was a guy, Pablo, that took over, but before Pablo, there was another guy that ran the whole thing. What? Say the name?
May have been Mornay, I think.
Mornay, that's it. That's the name I was trying to get. So Mornay was kind of the first guy that started what I would call a formal team to run. And it was like coming together, and it was still kind of volunteer selecty, but they actually had then an HOL, what I'd call director, that was then going to run, the infrastructure and start building out, and then, continue on. And I think that happened for a few years from 2010 to 2012 or 13 before you came. And then I think somewhere Mornay gave it up and they moved to cloud services. But Mornay ran it still on-prem, still built, and Mornay might have been part of the guy that built it at the bottom of the elevator, or escalators, I don't remember, but I know that there was a mid-transition where it kind of went formal. It had a director and it had budget, and then eventually then it went cloud, and then Pablo started taking over some of that elements, but not just the marketing front end, not the rest. So I don't know if that rings a bell or not.
Yeah. So to be clear, I guess we started out and it was 100% volunteers. When Mornay started kind of having people who actually ran the infrastructure, I don't know if that was a formal group within VMware, if it was still people kind of contributing part of their time.
I
when
think
I
that
started,
they had
go
a
ahead.
small team of like 3 or 4 or 5, like some number that dealt with the infrastructure and making sure the labs were built to run. Because I think prior to that, they had some of these outages, and it started to get embarrassing for the Explore event team. Got angry and said, we need to put somebody in charge of this so we can wring their neck when we get outages, right? Because there were, I don't know if you remember the outage.
That was
days.
2012. Yeah, that's so.
Yeah. Okay.
2013, when I started, is when they said, "Hey, look, we're going to have an actual team," and we built a small team that basically owned hands-on labs for basically year-round. So to kind of step back, all of the content is still developed 100% by volunteers. So people within VMware are the ones who create those labs, and they're the ones who support the labs. So somewhere between 300 and 400 people we bring online every year to create the new lab content. There's still just a small team that manages the entire lab process. Yeah. Right. And so the lab program, actually, we moved from hands-on labs at VMworld to VMware hands-on labs, which are available online 24/7. And so actually the Explore event is a kind of a small part of the overall labs program as far as content delivered. So the team's delivered about 4 million labs online since 2012, 2013, I guess, when we started tracking. And, of those, like at Explore in Las Vegas, we delivered a little over 7,000 labs. And, we kind of, in 2021, we were delivering 12,000 labs every week.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's like the program has just kind of grown by leaps and bounds since we started.
I feel like we're talking about now a big farm, right? Where you have orange trees, plum trees, apple trees, cornfields, and each component of this kind of, there was the original labs, and that's like peach trees, right? And then there was creating the labs, and then there's the customers consuming the labs all over the place. And yeah, it has grown into a mega farm, right? With John Deere massive tractors harvesting everything, because you're doing 7,000 a month versus the old days. I kind of miss the old days where labs were exclusive and you had to come to, to VMworld and stand in line and, get a lab, and then you were in a lab, and it was like, I felt like as soon as it all went online, everybody could do it all over the place. You could do it whenever you wanted, and it took away that excitement of going to Explore or VMworld and getting in line and getting a spot and getting a lab and running the software, which wasn't necessarily as available either. I feel like HOL enabled it. The downloads, got much better. You can go online and download anything now and get things set up. So the exclusivity and the lines at the bar have slowly gone away, right? Like, when you go to a good bar, because it's hard to get in, right? And then they don't even let Matt in, because they're like, no, sorry, you nobody with a beard or a mustache, you don't get to get in. But it is interesting, that whole transition that happen, and then that general availability. Then you start talking about gamification, and they started doing Odyssey and teams competing, and it was like an event in itself, right? Like that. And some of that I think was done to add the excitement back, because we didn't have a line at the bar anymore. So because they're generally available online, why would you come to Explore to do them when you could just do them, you know? Then there is also the concept of when they're available, right? Like, so then Explore became the place where you were launching new labs, right? Or at least I felt like that when I was going to come to Explore. That's the first taste I was going to get of whatever the new tech was, the announcements, and you guys started to align the announcemements. So let's talk a little bit because you worked on, dealing with making sure new labs were coming through the pipeline, right? I think that was part of your job. So how did that start? How did that start up? And then what were the transitions that happened there?
Sure. So we actually thought about that a lot, about the kind of cannibalizing the excitement and the labs availability at Explore, and we thought, hey, if we make these available online all the time, are people going to want to still come to the labs to Explore? And we actually had a line at Las Vegas this year, so people still, even though it's online, like you said, we release new content at Explore. So people, they want to see the new stuff, they'll come to Explore and still be able to see the new stuff. So for example, we released 2 brand new labs at Explore, basically a AI related type labs that were announced during the keynote, and then we had a lab for them during the event. So as far as content development, we start in February of every year, and that's when we talk to the business units, see what's on the plan for between now and the Explore conference. Look at our development cycle, and then we onboard our volunteers and lab teams to be able to create each of those labs. So kind of there's a whole process of developing the labs according to our baseline templates with the new software or the latest version we can get, and then going through a bunch of testing to make sure we don't have those repeats of the embarrassing, outages or downtime during the event. So, we're kind of. Oh, go ahead.
Just as an aside, they did offer us lab space this year for the Chat GPT lab because we were sold out, and they offered us like a slot in a 50-person room. But there is a process to do it, and we were way too late to get that set up and get it verified and in a VM, the lab, the process, there is a full process. How long do you think it takes from when somebody says, oh, we got something, we want to do a lab, to when it actually shows up in a lab?
Sorry, I cut out there for just a second. So
sure. How long does it take when you have an idea to when it's ready to go into production? I'm just curious because we tried to do that with the Chat GPT labs, and we only had like 4 weeks, and we're like, I don't think we can that's way too soon. We can't get that going, right?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there is the whole, kind of, is the software available? And then do we have the resources available to be able to design the content, create the content, and then test the content, and then we have to stage all the content in time for the event, right? So there were years where we had 20 different cloud instances where we had to publish the content. So we kind of, it takes months. So we will usually, like I said, we start in February with the onboarding. Generally, we'll start development sometime in April, and we try to finish by July to do testing. Get the clouds and the content tested for in August.
I feel better now because they offered, when the labs got open in Schedule Builder, and they all sold out within a day, right? This was like in July, right? And they're like, well, we could give you a lab, and we could give you VMs, and we'll give you a 50-person room. And I'm like, I don't think I can make that happen, right? And there's a quality level that you're expected to have if you're in the HOL environment, right? And I don't think we would have been able to do that. So that makes sense. That was just my own question. Going back to when you guys were transitioning into the cloud model, right? And you start doing this, what were some of the worst memories you can have on what didn't work? And I'll give you a moment to think about that, because that's not what you normally do. And so, but because we're in throwback world, right? We want to hear the bad stories as well as the good ones.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges with when you go to a cloud is that everything's remote, right? So we had our development cloud, and if you build one of these lab environments in your development cloud, yeah, you have a lab team that gets in and they spec out. We've got a vCenter, a bunch of ESXi hosts, some storage. You've got a mini data center that you're building for each of these labs. Well, when you get that and you have to move that to another cloud, that's a lot of data. It's like for one lab, I think our averages were somewhere around 700 gigs of stuff that we needed to copy, and we had 40 of those things that we needed to put in different clouds. So just the moving the data around was actually quite a challenge, especially when you were moving something from California to London. That you'd have to. Everyone always said, "Well, we just put a bunch of tapes on a truck and send it." But there's kind of that whole problem of then nobody can change their lab for a month while the tapes get made, the truck gets sent, and everything gets
I guess the
reimported.
logistics of that, when we went and started doing Europe Explorer, then you had labs and you had to propagate the labs in the clouds. In the early days, I think you probably just sent I'm not even sure we did labs in Explorer in Europe I don't even know. Like, I didn't track much of that.
Yeah, we did. Some of the other logistical challenges are like the equipment from the room, right? So just building the room where we have 500 seats in a lab room. Whether you ship that equipment all the way over to Spain, for example, or whether you rent the equipment in Spain, that's a cost concern, but also how close are the events scheduled together, and can it make it on the plane or the boat in time? So I think logistics are fun.
Yeah, we have that even for the ChatGPT labs. We've got little x86 servers, and to ship little small x86 servers over there, they're like, okay, tell us the battery requirements, and do we have to pay tariffs, and like are you going to bring them back, and make sure they don't light on fire in the plane, and then there's deadlines that have to be, and you're like, I don't even have everything ready. And it is a logistical challenge, let alone getting over there and the power supplies and making sure that the power strips don't burn at 240 volts and, on and on. And you're like, I don't know if we can. Yeah. So I can imagine that then when you were doing the physical from point to point, but then when you did go cloud, all of the cloud problems, which are the cloud services the same? Can you get your data over there? How do you get your data over under? Everybody thinks, oh, that's just magic cloud, but no, there's logistics to that.
It's all of our clouds were running VMware Cloud Director, right? So there's kind of that layer across the top. So you'd think all the clouds are pretty much the same, but every cloud kind of had its own personality, just based on a variety of things that go on there.
Then we started getting into the online all the time, right? And did you guys ever consider just using the online infrastructure for the event infrastructure, or how did you keep those separate while everything was happening? Like,
great question. So actually, some years we did use some of the online infrastructure. So because paying for that much capacity all the time it can be expensive, right? So we started out and we'd say we might shut down some of or reduce capacity for the production, the always on, and use that capacity for our large scale events. And then we got to the point where we could augment. So with VMware Cloud on AWS becoming available, we actually would stand up some SDDCs in VMware Cloud on AWS and put labs there during the events.
Doug, when did we make the transition from VCD over to Lab Manager?
So it would be the other way, right? So we, since 2013, we've always used VCD. So we use it in a Lab Manager use case because VCD effectively evolved from Lab Manager. And so we've taken that, and the Lab Manager use case is effectively I'm going to build one thing, an entire environment. I'm going to capture that as a set of virtual machines, and then I'm going to stamp out a whole bunch of those machines, or a whole bunch of those sets, and give each lab user, access to their own set of machines, which are identical. So we started using the VMware. You might be talking about the VMware Lab platform.
Yes, lab
Okay,
platform.
all right.
Forgive me.
So yeah,
I'm
so that was
thinking
actually
back to the episode that we did on 653, Right Power to Explore with David and Kelly Smith in regards to the whole entire lab platform and how that's evolved into its own ecosystem now that we offer as not only as an internal use case for instances like this, but then for customers and partners as well.
Okay. So the VMware Lab platform consumes vCloud Director org VDCs effectively. So I think the VMware Lab platform used to be called the VMware Learning Platform, and before that it was Project NE. So it was the next generation education environment. I think that whole project came out of starting with, I think, Mornay's group, where they would build the interface for labs at VMworld or Explore, and then they would actually build kind of a new interface every year, and it became something. They said, we're building this every year. Why don't we just build something and then we can enhance it every year? Right. So they enhanced it. We kind of ran it through a couple of VMworlds to make sure it was okay. That was when we started putting it online. And then they said, okay, we can trust this thing. Let's productize it. And kind of the rest is history.
And how does, if at all, from the early days, as far as when we're, whether it was the on premises actually at the show, or maybe even more importantly, when we were transitioning over to Colo, our history with what would have been VDM, then over to View, then over to Horizon, fit into that as far as a delivery endpoint or a delivery front end into the labs themselves?
So I know they used, prior to transitioning over to the VMware Lab platform model, which basically uses a web-based version of the VMRC. That's kind of how it's delivered today, where you can just fire up a web browser and it's a web part.
Sure.
So that's how. So prior to that, they were using some Horizon desktops to deliver lab content. I know it was somewhere between 2010 and 2012. I'm still a little fuzzy in there. When we got the Teradici code, they were using that to do the remote access to Terramark, I think.
Yeah, the PC over IP was probably 2008, 2009. I'd have to go back and look in the View history. I know that was a big release. I want to say that was View 4. Somebody's going to correct me out there. Sean Massey's going to be listening along to this episode and send me a DM on Twitter and goes, "Oh, it was exactly on this," because that or Johan, and I'm sure I'll get corrected. But I want to say it was in the View 4 release-ish timeframe where we brought in PC over IP support.
And they did use that. I remember so I wasn't part of the team at the time, but as a customer, I remember looking kind of at the architectures, when they would put big posters up in the lab area and kind of show, this is how we're connecting to Lab Cloud. They had Teradici, the physical appliances they were using, like gateways of some sort, to connect to the remote environments. But I don't know much about how Horizon was used otherwise.
It's always interesting to see how we start to incorporate what we have in the platform, and then when we fill the needs, and then certainly where that was at as far as building a repetitive product, and then being able to then turn that into a product that is now our lab platform as a whole.
Well, I think to your kind of where you're going with that is one of the things that surprise a lot of attendees when we talk to them at the big events is they can say, well, how big's the pipe that comes into this venue? You say, well, it's actually, fairly small because all we're doing is sending, screen data. Yeah.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Interesting time. I felt like Another good transition in the land of HOL. And I'm a kind of community guy, so I sense things, and I don't really care about the business element as much as other people do. I care about the community and what are people learning and that kind of thing. And so for me, I also watched it become more of a core business element. HOL became something that was part of the adoption workflow of buying VMware, starting to do labs, or even before you closed a deal with a big company,
Mhm.
you would see labs be part of the pre-sales process, right? And so I saw that start transitioning. Then they started talking tracking codes, and and then how many labs are you delivering, and how much revenue pipeline is that generating? Did you experience any of that during those years of transition?
Oh yeah, yeah. So, we kind of started out as, hey, look, we'll just make the labs available for free and people can take them, and hey, it'll be great. And then we kind of looked at, we talked to users and we talked to our SEs, and people liked using our labs. Just, hey, I'm going to get in and kick the tires on this new product, new version, whatever.
Right.
Some people would actually like deploy one of our lab environments so they could test something they wanted to do in production. Say, hey, if I make this change, can it be done live, or does it require me to reboot my hosts or reboot VMs or whatever? So it's like it was a sandbox environment that was available for free, and from the community perspective, that's awesome, right?
Right.
And then we started. The SEs could use it for the same thing, where, hey, I just want to show a customer something real quick, or I want to give a demo. We always tell people you can take the manual that's in the lab and just throw it to the side and go freestyle, because they are live environments, and people did that all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. And so then, we kind of evolved that to you can host your own events. So if you wanted the HOL team to deploy 25 copies of a given lab,
That's
because
right.
you
I
wanted
remember
to run.
Yep.
And so that's kind of where the tracking codes came in, because we could say, okay, this business unit or this SE was, had 25 people, we deployed those, and, you could kind of do some math and say, based on, the customers that attended this event and then the purchases that happened for that software, you could say,
sadly, and this gets into the how the sausage is made a little bit too much,
Yeah.
but I was in digital marketing. So the community team worked, because we have blogs and we have VM10, which is a web property. We worked in the web team, right? The community team was part of the web team because it was web infrastructure. It was delivering the community enablement. And somehow we get into these conversations where they'd be like, oh, look at us. We generated, $1 billion worth of revenue from all our stuff. And you dig into it and you'd be like, well, they were taking credit for HOLs that were being done online as lead gen, and that was somehow generating this customer revenue. And I just sit in the corner and I raise my hand timidly and go, you guys know that by the time somebody's doing an HOL, 80% of them have already bought the product. They've made the decision that they were going to use that product, and they're just learning the product. And that's post sales. That wasn't really you generating more revenue for the business. I hate to tell you. And they just look at me and growl and say, oh, no, we know we're doing this. I'm like, okay, never mind. I'll just let it go. But there was it became this on my side of the house of, oh, look, HOLs are generating, because you can, anytime you touch a customer, you can give it points, and you can then, go into the Salesforce and accumulate, and then track how much revenue that customer generated. And somehow that touch point, so HOL generated that revenue. And I'd be like, okay, maybe some instances, 20% of those instances are correct. Somebody came through and took HOL and it convinced them to buy something. But 80, 90% of us just going, hey, we want to go learn something. And somebody, to your point, Doug, they got their NSX certification. They've never installed NSX. They never had NSX on-prem. They just went into the NSX lab, got, you got root access to a VM with NSX, blah, blah, blah. And they did all their they got a pre-NSX. Somebody had a training course out there for free online, and they did it all. And then they went and got NSX certified, right? Like, how'd you do that? It's like, we just did the HOL prompt. We got access to the switches through HOL labs, right?
Yep.
And I think for me, that's what HOLs have always been about, right? It hasn't been about lead gen marketing, but I do see that it is part of the cycle as a customer. It is a key resource that people use. And I'm not, because I'm a community guy, I don't know for sure where everybody's using things. So I step back and in my corner and I don't raise my hand very much anymore because that's too real. So, but it has, I'm sure it crosses across the customer life cycle journey, right? Probably on all spots.
For sure. And I like the education aspect too, right? So I've even talked to some managers at the bigger events and they say, well, I don't really need to take these labs, but I have people who would really benefit from them. And so they'll, kind of build a quick curriculum for their staff to take certain content as part of their onboarding process. So they're using it as kind of vetting for new people or training for new people. The nice thing is they don't have to give someone root access to their production environment. They can say, go do this lab. And if you blow it up, no big deal.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Matt, any other things? I got more questions for Doug on like where he thinks he's going to go. He says he's got a different job now. So, we are community.
I was just going to follow up on that. This being, a little bit more on the community side. Doug, you had mentioned that you have transitioned over to another role within the VMware ecosystem. If you feel comfortable about that, can you talk about that transition process and what you're currently doing now?
Sure. So I guess to level set, I am back. I'm with the Hands-On Labs team as a volunteer this year. So I'm what we call the lab principals. So I own a set of labs, and then we get those created for the events. I moved on to a role in cloud incubation. So I work on new and emerging products in the cloud space. So the VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, ransomware recovery is one thing that I'm working on. Cloud Flex storage, that sort of thing. So kind of getting those products incubated, talking to customers some more, and kind of getting their feedback, feeding back to engineering to make sure that the products that are created are something that people can use or want to use.
So you live in the CMBU org now somewhere in that, or what org does that live in? Just cloud business.
Lost audio there real quick.
So what group?
So I work in the sales org.
Okay. All right.
I'm tightly associated with CIBG though.
Yeah, so say CIBG, Cloud Infrastructure Business Unit. Yeah, there you go.
A second, my audio is.
No problem. Now I'm just pausing because I don't have a follow-up question that makes sense. But what I would say is that we've announced doing, obviously, Explore in Europe, where we've announced Explore next year. So I expect the lab space to continue moving forward as we transition to a Broadcom entity, right? Come November 1st, I think if we're going to be here, we're going to be Broadcom employees. And I know we've already started to announce a lot of the stuff. And since HOL is part of that flow, I don't see a lot of things changing. I see that we'll still have things online. Matt, what's your impression there?
Oh, I mean, we can't. I mean, we're asking to gaze deep into the crystal ball here for both. Of course, we know the events have been announced for next year, so that there will be an Explore in some fashion. Can we say that the HOL will be there for certain? No, but I would think that if we're trying to keep some part of what is known as the VMworld and VMware Explore ecosystem is moving forward, that in some way, shape, or form, that HOL will be there and will have a strong presence as it has always had throughout the duration of those events.
Yeah, and there's two elements that make me think that not that much is going to change. One is we've already announced that we're doing Europe. We know that the Europe, everything is as steady as she goes, and we're going to continue, doing Europe exactly the way, Barcelona, explore Barcelona. So the labs are going to be there. I've seen them on the maps. So that's all happening, which Doug, we just, mentioned while you were audio fritzing there, that we expect this to continue on, right? We don't expect this to, we can't say what we don't know, but we have announced Explore in Europe next year, US next year. We're obviously going in Europe. That's across the Broadcom threshold. So I don't expect a lot to change with regards to offering up labs. And I know they are looking at all the platforms and how we deliver everything, and how to optimize our platform delivery mechanisms, much the way, and I would say that maybe some of the Broadcom topics will end up in HOL. What would be some of my guesstimates, because it's a very mature platform, right? So I see a lot of that, a lot of what we're seeing here continuing on, right? Like, I don't expect any major changes, right, from that. And what I think Broadcom really wants to focus on is deeper penetration into large accounts. They want their customers to be happy. So I think that they might consolidate, various products into, maybe they'll collapse some orgs, or maybe they'll do something. But I think the key enterprise products will continue on, and they want deeper penetration. And what does deeper penetration mean? It means get rid of shelfware. What does get rid of shelfware means? It means teaching people how to use our products. How do you teach people how to use their products? HOL. So I think that layer is pretty safe from a standpoint of what they're going to be focused on. That's my 2 cents, right?
And of course, Eric, we should call out, while HOL, we focus in on the Explore events, there is the HOL site that's out there, right? HOL.vmware.com. And of course, the complementary product with that over at testdrive.vmware.com for a little bit deeper runs, if you will. And if you don't have access to testdrive.vmware.com, reach out to your sales team, or if you are so entitled, to your customer success team, and they can sponsor you with an access code over to those. And you can enjoy those at your leisure from home for many of the elements that are out there. Will they be the absolute cutting and latest greatest labs that are out there at the Explore event? Maybe not, but eventually those products will end up potentially in those platforms.
That's a good question.
You can enjoy them now from the convenience of your home.
That's a good question for Doug, Matt, which is, what's the timeline from when the new labs end up at Explore to when they show up online for people that can't make it to Explore?
Very good question. So it's kind of, every year we tried to say they'll be about a month out from Barcelona. It really depends. We kind of release them in phases. So they've actually released some of the labs from Las Vegas online now. So it's a matter of getting those labs copied over to the other clouds so that they can be hosted there, for the public consumption.
That follows up another question. How many clouds are there when you're talking global lab delivery? Europe, US, APJ, or is it more complicated?
So for the typical day-to-day lab clouds, there were 3. So they were all based last year. They were all based in on the west coast of the US.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So one of the things we found is where the labs actually run doesn't matter so much for the user experience as getting access from whatever, the RDP session or the VMRC session into the lab desktop.
I guess the pipes are big enough now and fast enough. Electrons are pretty fast. Maybe you get a quarter-second lag or half-second lag across the planet. A full loop on the planet is a second or something like that, but a half loop, maybe half a second. So I'm sure you guys deal with that. This is not really your bag of tea. Now I'm just talking, right? But do you think that they cache some of that? Do they, you host it in a cloud, but do they cache any of this stuff globally, like Akamai or anybody else?
It can't
Probably
really be cached because it's live environments. And so it's actually a WebSockets connection for the console. So it's a bidirectional, almost like a video kind of thing. So
Oh, right. Yeah. So you're just live streaming. Yeah, you're not actually
yeah.
running anything. Yeah, local in the country. Yeah, that's interesting. Doug, other thing that I'll have to ask you, because we are coming up at the top of the hour. Are you? I remember right. You're in Colorado, but like, does that right, or is it somewhere? Where are you based in these days?
I'm in Arizona.
Arizona. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
So you got close, very close.
that's not that close, but okay. That's a whole 10, 15 degree temperature difference at least. Right?
True.
Yeah. Arizona. All right. So what else do we, all right. We would, Matt, we typically ask like, what excites you for in technology next year? Everybody's AI, ML, anything, you're the labs that you're volunteering for now. What excites you for things in the future or even in your day job? What excites you about what you see coming down the pike?
Well, I think the applications of AI are definitely going to be interesting. So the whole Copilot thing, I think, is really interesting going forward. Is how can we make our jobs easier and reduce the opportunities for human error. And then also for my day job, the ransomware recovery stuff that we're working on, I think is really cool. And it's all over the news, people getting hit by ransomware. We kind of like to say that it's a matter of when rather than if these days, because it seems these attacks are getting just more and more sophisticated. And so
Right.
our ransomware recovery solution is like giving you the ability to roll back if something bad happens.
It's true because I got hit earlier this year. We talked about it in the podcast, and they wanted 40,000 Bitcoin for like 3 or 4 VMs that I had running, and none of it was worth anything like that. So, I had to go back, and the federal government put out a decryptor, right? That VM, for vSphere, because my vSphere stuff got encrypted, my VMs, and there was a process to go through it. Eventually, it didn't work, so then I just had to build everything from scratch, which was not the end of the world, but it took me a month to go do that. Right. It does happen regardless of who you are, small, tiny, mid-sized robots, AI. I think they're going to use AI to go figure out how to get into us. Right. So,
yep.
So you took the MGM approach, Eric. Doug got that one. Rebuilding it from scratch.
Yeah, is that what they did? I didn't pay attention.
I'm assuming for as long as they were down, right? I mean,
they just decided
we're going to go on an entire tangent here, but this is one of those things that we often talk about in a disaster plan, right? Where it's one thing to have the backups, it's another thing to put your run book in place for recovery. And the automation that is out there with the tooling that we have and the incorporations that we have into, let's call it the disaster recovery life cycle and ecosystems that's out there with not only our internal products, but partners as well, allows you to test those run books. And I think MGM could have done a little bit better in that, given the length of their recovery here to the systems.
To Doug's point, which I think also as well, is I think there's just a need for a product that I say, okay, I'm going to pay X thousands of dollars a year, depending on my scale. And VMware gives you a product that just makes sure that it's running right, doing the right stuff, so that if this happens half a year from now, I can, use the product to create what I need to do to be back up and running, right, in some time frame.
Well, and I think that the challenge we're seeing is it's not the same as a typical disaster recovery where you say, I'm going to pick a point in time before the meteor hit, right, and recover all my good snapshots from that point in time. With ransomware, it's like each machine can be impacted at different times. You could have been impacted 3 months ago, and there's a machine that's kind of just going out and mapping your network. So that creates additional challenges for the whole process.
And chaos monkey behind it and testing against that.
Yeah. I can sense a whole podcast where Doug is going to come back in about 3 or 4 weeks, and we're going to get him on. We're just going to spend the whole time talking about the whole process of ransomware and how do we recommend everybody do it. And is there a product that's coming out? And I don't know anything about it. So it'd be interesting talk to you and get some insight.
Sure,
Yep.
sure.
All right.
I see future episodes with Doug and Mr. Plankers, and especially once we get to peel back the covers from when the CISO, if MGM decides to do a public disclosure of the attack vectors that were used. I'm not sure if they're going to go into that. They may or may not, but it would be a fantastic episode to dive into.
Yeah, it would be just to talk about the vulnerabilities that they exploited, right? Yeah. Doug, you're in Arizona. We should talk a little barbecue because we do live stream this, and you want to see what Doug Beer looks like, go to youtube.com/vbarbecue, VBARCUC. I don't know, V barbecue. I don't know.
You named it and made it complicated. I mean,
Yeah,
it's VBARBECUE.
And check it out.
B pool Q.
Yeah. And go check out what Doug looks like and say hello to him next time you see him. Doug, do you get to do any barbecue out in Arizona?
I do. I've got. I can do barbecue pretty much all year since the weather's generally pretty
And
nice.
do you smoke with pellets, Traeger? Do you use Kingsfield charcoal, or do you just gas grill, and call it barbecue? What's your strategy?
I've historically, so I built this like Franken smoker out of an old Weber kettle. So I was using wood. I just got a pellet grill, so I'm going to try that out probably in a couple weeks.
That's a lot of fun. Yeah, I finally got my pellet grill about half a year ago, and it's a lot of fun because you just go smoke everything in the planet, right? You catch anything you can and put it on the smoker, and you're smoking everything. Eventually, you get tired of the smoke, you get tired of that flavor, but for the first amount of time, it's a lot of fun to get that flavor. And I still owe Matt Lungeth a Traeger. I just gotta go on Amazon. I'm gonna just do it. I gotta go make that happen for you, Matt, so that so you can. I tell people like that when I say go have children, and then when they do have children, they go, "You son of a bitch, you talked me into having children." I say, "Yeah, because I just want you to feel the pain, and you can be down here with the rest of the sodomites, grinding away on the."
I promise that if their aforementioned piece of
Traeger
cooking
shows
equipment
up,
would just happen to show up, that we will be doing live streams. I mean, we'll move the Matt Langeth home office outside and
the
record
camera
the
next
studios.
to it, smoke billowing out. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
There you go.
Add a whole entire new element to our live stream.
And then last, we'll do Tony Foster. You got anything on the barbecue front?
I do. So I did barbecued quinoa.
Barbecued quinoa. Okay, quinoa. I know what quinoa is, and how do you make barbecued quinoa?
So what I did, I have a nice stainless steel bowl that I like to use on my grill. Put butter in, put my quinoa, the actual grain in, and browned everything, got it nice and crispy, so to speak, on the grill, added my water, closed the lid, and let everything cook like you're supposed to. And I got this really good, really rich flavored quinoa on my grill.
So you basically pot cooked it on your grill, right? But it picked up enough smoke from the grill environment to give it a flavor?
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. There you go. Matt, that sounds like something you could do, right? Even on a gas grill.
I mean, it's just one step off of boiling water. So, right. I mean,
exactly.
It might be feasible.
Pretty soon you're going to say, I put my crock pot on my grill and then I plugged it in and I like, I don't know how that works. So I believe you. Well, Doug Beer, thanks a lot for showing up. Good to see you again. I hope everything goes well over the next month or two as we transition into BODCOM. We thought we would have some old guests that were our favorites come back, and you're one of them. So thanks a lot for showing up. It was fun to see you again.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. We'll be back again next week. Until then, everybody go get some barbecue. Have a good life. Life's short. Got to eat some food and enjoy yourself. We'll be back next week.
Recording paused.
Thank you, Doug.
Sure.